U.S. Deputy Treasury Secretary Wally Adeyemo, thank you so much for speaking to Arise News. Appreciate you coming to the country. Welcome home. I want to start off by noting that I think by my count, you're like the 17th high-level official from the Biden administration to visit the African continent. Everyone from Treasury Secretary Yellen to Vice President Harris, Joe Biden, and so on and so forth. Why the flurry of visits?
The reality is that we know that Africa represents the future, both economically but strategically for the United States and the world, and that's why we've been visiting so often this year. But the reality is that even in the beginning of the administration, we had a deep relationship with Africa and thinking through how we could make sure that COVID vaccines got to Africa. As the COVID pandemic has subsided, it's given us an opportunity to travel here more often, and we're doing that because we want to deepen the partnership with countries like Nigeria, given its importance to our economy, but also to the continent's economy.
All right, so the other side of that, some might say, is that the flurry of visits is to counter the influence of China and Russia on the African continent, and the U.S. is scrambling to make up that ground. What would be your response to that?
So I think especially here in Nigeria, the reality is that the deep bonds between the United States and Nigeria can be seen in the people-to-people relationships. I can say this as a Nigerian American. There are 500,000 Nigerian Americans who live in the United States and thousands of Americans who live here. American companies are invested in Nigeria, and I spend time with entrepreneurs here in Nigeria who are selling goods and services in Nigeria. So even before you get to the government-to-government relationships, you have deep connections between Africa and Nigeria in people-to-people and businesses. Our government is here not because we're looking to counter another government, but because we know that ultimately the economic future of Africa is critically important to us, and especially Nigeria as Africa's largest country. Our goal is to really make sure that Nigeria, which is now a country of 200 million, but will be a country of 400 million by 2050, has not only the potential, which you see in leaps and bounds in streets in Lagos and all over this country, but also has opportunity. And we think that that opportunity can be created by your government and your people working closely with partners like the United States.
All right. In your speech at the Lagos Business School, you said not to focus so much on oil, that Nigeria's people are the real asset. But oil is still very important to Nigeria. I want to ask you about the U.S. stance on oil imports. Using the Energy Information Administration data, the EIA, U.S. imports of Nigerian oil fell from about 32 million barrels in 2010 to like 800,000 in 2022. It's back up to about 6 million, but they're falling. Is that because shale is a similar grade, and with oil prices rising, does that incentivize more shale production? I mean, you will import less oil from Nigeria. What's the stance there on oil imports?
I think the most important thing Nigeria can do is invest in its oil and gas industry, but its energy sector more broadly. Nigeria today is underproducing the amount of oil that it can based on its quota, and part of that's driven by underinvestment in that industry. And the way that you get foreign direct investment into Nigeria's industry is making sure you have a macroeconomic framework that supports that. In addition to oil and gas, clean energy is playing a larger role in Nigeria every day, including solar panels. Today, one of the major investments America has made with our Development Finance Corporation has been in trying to get more solar into Nigeria, because it's an energy source that in some ways allows people to use generators less and rely on the sun more. But overall, the key to making sure that Nigeria is in a position to take advantage of its natural resources, both the sun and the resources found in the ground, is making sure that you get more foreign direct investment. That's why we're encouraged by the early moves this new Nigerian administration has made, but more reforms need to be made to attract more foreign direct investment into Nigeria's energy sector.
It's not every day we get a chance to talk to the Deputy Treasury Secretary, so I got to jump into a few geopolitical things. Just on oil, still sticking with oil, it's at $94, $95 a barrel today, and of course we know that Saudis have decided to extend their voluntary cuts to the end of the year. Russia's doing the same. The U.S. has, expressed its displeasure with this. Do you feel that the Saudis and the Russians are doing this deliberately to, cause issues on the geopolitical scale, or do you think that with where we are with oil prices now, that that's just an issue of supply and demand?
So I won't speak to the decisions that are made by OPEC, but I do want to say that it is critical that we have an energy market that allows for sustainable growth to happen. That's both in the interest of consumers like the United States, but also producers like Nigeria and Saudi Arabia to make sure that we have a market that is stable, that allows for global growth to continue, because in the end, you need consumers to be able to buy your products, and that requires global growth. But ultimately, what we've learned from Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which in lots of ways drove up not only energy prices, but also the price of food in places like Nigeria around the world, is that we need to make sure that we have a better energy mix, not only in the United States, but around the world. To deal with the climate challenges, the ones that we're facing all over the world, including here in Nigeria, we need more renewables. And that's why the United States has made a heavy investment in renewable energy through what we call the Inflation Reduction Act, which has allowed us to increase the amount of investments that are made in the United States on our clean energy future. And that's why the United States is willing to work with your government to further the climate agenda that they've set out for Nigeria as well, to make sure that Nigeria has the ability to rely on renewable energy. I know that recently the government removed the fuel subsidy, which was an important thing to do to help create fiscal stability and sustainability for your country, but has caused some pain for Nigerians. Ultimately, one of the things that needs to be done is to make sure that Nigeria has an energy mix that allows people to move away from using generators in many cases to being able to get power from the grid, but also being able to rely on things like solar power going forward. So from our standpoint, the most important thing that can happen is making sure that we build out a robust energy pipeline in America that includes fossil fuels, but is more and more reliant on renewable energy to meet our climate goals, but also to make sure that we have better energy security.
Great. You're heading to New York, of course, from here for the United Nations General Assembly. President Tinubu of Nigeria is there. Even President Ruto of Kenya is in Chicago and San Francisco looking for investment dollars to go into Kenya. What does Nigeria need to do to attract a Walmart to open a giant store or facility in Anambra State, or a Tesla to open a gigafactory in Nasarawa? What do we need to do to get those investment dollars to come into Nigeria?
What Nigeria needs to do is what Nigeria has been doing, investing in its people. And I think what I found being in Nigeria is that you have talented people who are filled with potential. The key question is, how do you create opportunities for them? I think some of the early steps that the government has taken is doing that, from trying to unify the exchange rate to making difficult choices to end the fuel subsidies. Now the question is, how is the government going to invest the resources it now has, because the fuel subsidies have ended, in building up infrastructure, both digital and fiscal infrastructure, but also in various sectors like education and power, to make sure that companies around the world, including the Walmarts and other companies in the United States, know that they will have an ease of doing business here. A big part of this is transparency and making sure that while the president is there, he lays out a very clear agenda for what his administration is going to do to make the economic reforms the Nigerians have known need to be made for a long time. But ultimately, today, while in Nigeria, I spent time talking to Nigerian businesses, but also to American businesses here. And what I've heard from them is that there's a great deal of money on the sidelines waiting to try and invest in Nigeria, as long as the types of reforms that the president has talked about are made. So I look forward to seeing the day when more companies are coming into Nigeria because those reforms have been made.
Great stuff. This is a very pivotal week. You've got some central bank decisions coming up that we cover. The Federal Reserve on Wednesday, Bank of England on Thursday, the Bank of Japan on Friday. But are you mindful of the impact that rate hikes have on emerging markets like in Nigeria? So for instance, if you hike rates, that increases the attraction of US securities, capital flight, and it also makes the dollar stronger, which makes emerging market currencies weaker. Does that prompt as the US view on improving assistance? I know it's a domestic issue and you have to take care of your economy first, but what do you make of that impact that these rate hikes have on emerging markets like in Nigeria?
So I think one of the most important things for me to say is that in the United States, we believe in an independent monetary authority. So the Federal Reserve makes independent decisions of our Treasury, and we found that to be a productive way to run our macroeconomic framework in the United States, because it gives the central bank the ability to make the decisions it needs to. And I think that countries that have done that have found that to be productive going forward. So they make independent decisions, but ultimately the decisions they make are to accomplish two goals. One is to make sure that we meet our interest rate target, but also to make sure that we have full employment in our economy. And they're going to take steps to do that. Ultimately, in Nigeria, the key to unlocking growth and unlocking opportunity here is in the hands of your government and your people. It's getting a macroeconomic framework in place that leaves companies and investors with the ability to make investments in Nigeria and allows Nigerian small and medium-sized enterprises to get credit from banks to be able to make investments in their company. Nigeria has 40 million micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises. We need to unlock their opportunity. And doing that is something that the United States and your partners around the world want to help you with, including the World Bank and the African Development Bank. That's why the United States has made more than $1 billion of investments in Nigeria in terms of both helping with healthcare needs, but also with food security. And we look forward to continuing that relationship and deepening it going forward.
So your speech here at the Lagos Business School, you talked about the importance of tracking illicit financial flows. Is it important that the dollar remains the reserve currency of the world to be able to assist in the U.S. being able to successfully clamp down on illicit financial flows? Because there's been, there was the BRICS summit not too long ago where there was talk of another currency and so on and so forth. But does there have to be a reserve currency to make sure that these kinds of tracking are possible?
The reality is that the tracking of illicit financial flows is something that each government has to do, regardless of what the currency is. And that's why we're encouraged by not only Nigeria's membership in the Financial Action Task Force, but also your willingness to make the reforms that are needed. Ultimately, regardless of the currency in question, the key is that the banking sector and the formal and informal financial sector take the steps to prevent illicit financial flows because they have a huge impact on the economy. They are the tools that fraudsters, corrupt actors, terrorists, and those who do kidnappings use on a regular basis. The reason the dollar plays such a prominent role in the global economy is because of the strength of our economy. Ultimately, the reason that people want to invest in America is because of the policy decisions that we've made in America to invest in both our infrastructure, but also in the long-term health of our economy. And we know that if Nigeria makes those same type of policy choices during this administration, it will unlock the potential of this economy as well and will lead to greater investments here.
I do want to ask you about debt, not U.S. debt. Leave the Republicans to do that. This is Nigeria's debt. The most recent figure is $113 billion total debt. About 38%, 32% of that is foreign debts, about $43 billion. The U.S., of course, largest shareholder in the World Bank, the IMF, you call the shots. What's your view on debt relief? You've talked about COVID, you've talked about the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Those have, of course, impacted the debt of emerging markets like in Nigeria. What's the stance on debt relief?
So I think it's important to recognize that previous governments have increased the debt that Nigeria has. But an important decision that your government made in terms of ending the fuel subsidies is going to create more fiscal space for Nigeria going forward. The question is really how are they going to use that fiscal space? And it needs to be done in a transparent way so that the people see that that money is being used to both invest in making sure that you over time bring down your debt burden, but also investing in infrastructure, be it digital or fiscal infrastructure, education, and the other things that Nigeria needs going forward. The key is that institutions like the World Bank, the United States, and your partners are willing to work with you as you make those investments and you bring down your debt burden over time. It's something that we are ready to do and talk about with the Nigerian government in order to make sure that we're your partners in growing the economy. Because Nigeria's economy is primed to grow if policy decisions are made that unlock the potential of the Nigerian people. I strongly believe that the Nigerian people have an entrepreneurship in their blood. They're innovators, they're creative. That's why they start so many small businesses, why so many unicorns have been found here in Nigeria. The key is making sure that government policy unlocks that potential. And what I want to make very clear is the United States, the World Bank, your international partners want to be your partners in accomplishing that goal.
Great stuff. Just a couple of more questions. Technology and jobs. You talked about that here at the Lagos Business School. But with what's unfolding right now, I just want to bring up the UAW, the unions and the auto industry and the Screen Actors Guild over in Hollywood. It's felt that the strike that's going on, which of course negotiations are still ongoing with the UAW union, is because electric vehicles cost less to build than fossil fuel vehicles. And you mentioned the Inflation Reduction Act, which actually has tax credits for individuals that want to purchase electric vehicles. So there's that. And then you've got the Screen Actors Guild and the Hollywood writers that are on strike because they're afraid of what artificial intelligence means for studios having to spend less to hire them. What is your view on technology and how it could displace jobs in the future, not just for the US, but also here in Nigeria and other emerging markets?
Let me just start by saying that one of the things that the President Biden believes in deeply is the right of people to unionize. We know that in America, unionization has contributed to the growth of employment in our economy and has helped employees, unionized or non-unionized, get better benefits in the work that they do. Ultimately, we think that technology is a means to enhancing the jobs that people do. They enable people to continue to do the work that they want in their economy. And Nigeria is a testament to that. You see a creative industry that's growing up in Nigeria. You see the ways in which digitization is unlocking possibilities for firms to grow here in Nigeria. And that's what we think you'll see throughout the world, that AI, that technology more broadly is going to unlock the ability for the economy to grow. And the key is going to be making sure that that everyday people benefit from that. And I think we'll just take a simple example of a store in Nigeria today. Ultimately, for that store owner, being able to digitize the way that they get paid can improve not only their ability to make sure that they're keeping the money that they get in a way that's secure, but also helps them collect the data that they can use then to take to the bank, to get a loan, to make sure they can expand that business going forward. What that requires is building a true digital infrastructure here in Nigeria. You've taken a lot of early steps to do that, but those are going to take investments both by your government, but this is another place where the United States wants to partner with you because we think that digitization is a way to unlock the potential of the Nigerian economy. Imagine being able to go, instead of having to go to a government agency to get a form, being able to get that form or fill out that form online using your phone or your computer. That'll increase productivity throughout the economy. Instead of spending hours at that government agency, you can spend it building your small business. So ultimately, we think that technology has the ability to contribute to productivity growth in the United States, but also here in Nigeria.
Diversity. I have to ask you about the message that the administration is putting forward on diversity. Of course, you are first, black man to be the Deputy Treasury Secretary. You're serving with the first female Treasury Secretary. We've got the first female Vice President, woman of color. What's the diversity message that the Biden-Harris administration is projecting to the rest of the world?
I think what President Biden has made clear is that he wanted an administration that looked like America, one that reflected the diversity and the values of our great country, and that's exactly what he's built. It's an honor to get to work with Secretary Yellen, who is not only the first Secretary of the Treasury who is a woman, but also served as the first Federal Reserve chairwoman in our country. And what we've seen over the years is that America, and the Biden administration in particular, has been a country in which we have taken people who have come from different places, from different countries, and we've come together to build a democracy. And I know that's exactly what you are doing here in Nigeria, a multi-ethnic country that believes deeply in these democratic values. And it's one of many reasons we think that our partnership should only deepen, because we are the biggest democracies on our continent who believe deeply in the idea that we have to demonstrate that democracy works for our people. And we look forward to doing that work with your government and with the Nigerian people.
Look, you're a Nigerian. You came from humble beginnings. You have risen up the ranks. BlackRock, economic advisor at the Obama administration. Here you are now. What's your message to Nigerians that are watching, that want to get to where you are? What's your message of inspiration to them?
Yeah, and I think the thing that is true about Nigeria is that potential exists all over this country. Great, talented individuals exist. And the key is, how does your government, how does the country create opportunities for that talent? And that's exactly why the United States wants to partner with Nigeria, because we want to make sure that in Nigeria, you go from having a few unicorns to unicorns being created on every corner in this country, that not only in the areas of technology, but in science and all over the place. And we want to make sure that the talented people in Nigeria have the opportunity to not only have an impact here in this country, but on the continent and in the world. So my message is really to focus on making the changes that are critical to your country, to making sure that your government makes the investments that are needed to unlock the potential of this great country and the people who live in it.
Wally Adeyemo, Deputy Treasury Secretary of the United States of America, thank you so much for talking to Arise News. Appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me.
All right.